So our next speaker, Kesha, if you want to go ahead and get your slides loaded and share your screen.
Okay.
Kesha Fevrier is a recent PhD graduate from York University. She was part of the very first cohort of our Economics for the Anthropocene project. She is going to talk to us today about waste commodification, recycling, and the circular economy, some of the work from her successfully defended PhD dissertation. So congratulations again, Dr. Fevrier, and off you go.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. So John has given me my very brief introduction and the title of my presentation. This presentation I'm making is somewhat different to the research work I did. Much of my research on e-waste recycling in Ghana had more of a critical race and environmental justice lens to it. This presentation builds off of that to some extent, and it could be seen as a new sort of path or a new research strand that I could potentially explore. So when I did my research, when I talking about e-waste, you have in the very beginning, what was mentioned was its abundance and its toxicity. So before this presentation, I wanted to get up some figures. So the Global E-Waste Monitor for 2020 recently reported that worldwide, we dumped 53.6 million tons of e-waste. And of that 53.6 million, I think it's million and not billion, 17.4% was recycled. And I want to preface that this 17.4% does not mean that every single component of all that is dumped has been recycled. It is those components that have been valued so that they can re-enter new sort of circuits of production. This is what that has been recycled. Another UN report and UN press release that came out January last year, it said that the value of the e-waste dumped in 2019 was worth anywhere between the e-waste produced annually is worth $62 billion. So we produce this much, but the value of e-waste is 62 billion. So you can see how when these reports start valuing that waste stream, we move from a discussion about its abundance, its toxicity, to one about its economic potential. And that is what my research somewhat showed in Ghana. So when we look at the traditional waste management hierarchy, we look at, typically it starts with source reduction, but my research was focused here in this circle of recycling and composting, more so recycling because we were talking about metals, and how the idea of the circular economy or how agencies have used this idea of the circular economy to push forward the recycling of electronic waste. And I talk about these agencies to the extent that today you have an African Circular Economy Alliance that came out of the World Economic Forum. And the purpose of that group is to push the idea of the circular economy in Africa. And when they're pushing this idea, it's a circular economy for post-consumption waste. We're not talking about the waste that is produced at the source of extraction, just post-consumption. Also, you have projects funded by the EU, example, Switch Africa Green Program. All of these are using this idea of the circular economy of greening to push this, what word do I want to use? To push an agenda of recycling in African countries in the informal sector. And this is what I talked about in my research. But this presentation is not so much about post-consumption electronic waste. It's talking about the waste produced at the very beginning. So in the US, this ratio says that municipal solid waste accounts for 3% of the total amount of waste produced, solid waste produced in the US, whereas industrial solid waste amounts for 97%. E-waste falls within in some cases falls within the municipal solid waste, right? And so that means while we are talking about a lot of the post-consumption waste that we're recycling, and recycling rates are increasing for metals, for paper, for some plastics, for wood, etc., all of these things, the industrial waste that is not in our face, the industrial waste that is at the mining sites and these different sites, we don't see it. And this waste is the waste that is not being recycled. This is the waste that is also not talked about in the context of the circular economy. The other chart that we see looks at Canada, and Canada is a very interesting case because Canada divides its waste into non-residential versus residential non-hazardous waste. And you see that the two pie charts are very different. There's almost an equivalence in the case of Canada. But what Canada doesn't account for in this pie chart is hazardous waste, right? So how much hazardous waste is produced by industry in Canada, by the various mining companies, we don't know that. It is not captured in that diagram. So I just want to preface that. I don't want anyone to think that Canada is doing such a great job in terms of how it manages its own waste. It's just doing a very great job of how it hides its hazardous waste that is produced by industry. Again, I'm going to bring it back to, the next three slides are more of images of the places where some of the mineral components that go into our electronics are derived. So this is the Katanga province in the Congo, the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And the picture here you see is of a copper mine, right? And if you look at the devastation, if you look at the scale of the devastation, the amount of forest that has been cleared, you also have to ask yourself, what has happened to all that waste rock? Where is it? It's not being recycled, it's just being hidden. So that's one category of waste that is not covered by the ideas or the programs or the projects or the policies or the strategies, whichever name you want to call it, built around the idea of the circular economy. And here we just see the cleared forest. You wonder about the waste rock, but what about wastewater? So I'm just leaving these questions there to get people thinking about, the extent of the waste that is produced by industry that we don't typically talk about, because most of us don't go to these sites, all right? You throw your garbage out and you can see, you can visually see it's in your face, but this is not in our face unless somebody's doing research about it. This is not, which is what is covered by our general waste management policies. Here again, we have another mine. And in the background, this is a slag heap from cobalt mining. A picture here shows you men climbing that slag heap because there's still fragments of cobalt in the slag heap. All right, look at the devastation of the landscape. And again, we ask ourselves, how is this waste being recycled? Is it being recycled? And so this is a tailings storage facility in Ghana. I did my research in Ghana, and this is for a tailings pond for a gold mine. And again, you see the extent of that pond. And this is waste. The tailings ponds is waste. It is there as a form of storage until maybe some technologies develop that tailings can be reused as a raw material for some other production. But this is the sort of wide-scale devastation. You ask yourself, the tailing ponds, the wastewater, the waste rock, the waste vegetation, all of this is hidden from view when we only think about waste management or recycling at the tail end, at the end of the life cycle, and we don't focus sufficiently on the waste produced before consumption. So my presentation is short because I wanted us to really discuss that. While I talked in my research, I talked about the circular economy as not being used as another tool that continues the sort of racial subjugation of some places and some peoples, because I looked at e-waste recycling in Ghana from a critical race lens. Here, I want to focus on the idea that the circular economy doesn't suffer the same, I don't want to say demise, but suffer the same challenges of terms like sustainable development, how industry can co-opt some of these ideas, some of these strategies that have been developed by people or by organizations that have a vested interest in the environment, and how these industries can now co-opt these ideas, greenwash them, so that they sort of, it becomes a reiteration of the status quo. So my key thoughts is this: if recycling as a waste management strategy is premised on the commodification of waste streams into new rounds of wealth accumulation, how does the idea of the circular economy address non-commodified waste streams generally, but more importantly, hazardous waste produced and stored at the source of extraction? So in many ways, I think I would close by saying that we need, especially within these two groups of the L4E and the E4A, how do we ensure that the idea of the circular economy does not in itself make invisible waste produced by industry? And when we push forward these ideas, I think these are things that we need to think about. If we only focus on just the tail end of supply chains, if we only focus on overconsumption, we're also forgetting what happens before all of these. So my presentation has been short, to the point, and I hope that we can have a discussion about it and that we can all just share some ideas.